I think the hardest part of growing up is realizing that love alone is not enough. People always say love should make you feel safe, warm, and understood. But in my case, love slowly turned into a place where I felt small, unseen, and quietly scared of losing myself. Welcome to Stories by Amy. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. For a long time, I convinced myself that everything was fine. I told myself that every couple had challenges, that every relationship had moments of miscommunication, and that maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe I expected more love, more kindness, more respect than I deserved. It sounds strange now, but that is truly how I felt. I had been with my boyfriend for 2.5 years, and in those years, I learned the silent skill of holding my breath around someone who claimed to love me. Not literally, of course, but emotionally. I learned to walk on eggshells around his temper. I learned to shrink my voice so he wouldn't feel criticized. I learned to pretend that I was fine even when I felt lonely beside him. It wasn't always like that. In the beginning, he was gentle, warm, and so reassuring. He made me feel like I had finally found someone who saw me, someone who cared, someone who wanted a future with me. But little by little, tiny comments became louder. Small expectations grew into demands. And one day, without even noticing exactly when it happened, I realized that he didn't want a partner. He wanted someone who would stay quiet, stay small, and fit into the life he imagined for himself. Someone who would give up dreams, independence, and identity just to make him feel secure. He once said something that I can't forget. He said, "When we settle down, I expect you to be a housewife. A real one. I want you to stay home, take care of everything, and be there for me." He said it like it was the most normal expectation in the world, like he was offering me a gift. But all I felt in that moment was a slow, sinking feeling, a quiet alarm inside me telling me that this wasn't love. At least not the kind of love that grows. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I thought I owed the relationship more effort. I stayed because I thought leaving would make me a quitter. I stayed because I had invested time, feelings, hopes. You know how it is. But the truth is, I stayed because I didn't want to admit that I was breaking somewhere inside. I think we all reach a moment, a soft, painful moment, where something inside us whispers, "This is not what you deserve." And for me, that whisper became stronger every time he dismissed my feelings. Every time he made me feel dramatic for wanting tenderness. Every time he acted like my emotions were an inconvenience. The night I finally spoke up, I didn't go into the conversation to end the relationship. I went in hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would listen. Maybe he would soften his voice. Maybe he would look at me with the same eyes he had in the beginning. Maybe he would care, but instead he got angry. He turned everything around. He said I made him feel unappreciated. He said I was attacking him. He said I was the one ignoring his feelings. And in that moment, something inside me quietly broke. Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, just a soft, final realization like a door closing gently. I didn't shout, I didn't defend myself, I didn't cry, I just packed my things, the little I had at his place, and walked out. I blocked him everywhere. And as soon as the cold night air touched my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. A slow, deep breath that finally reached my chest. A small, soft sense of peace. A whisper inside me saying, "You did the right thing." And this is the story of how I found the courage to walk away from a love that no longer felt like love. A story of how losing someone can sometimes feel like finding yourself again. When I look back now, I realize that relationships rarely fall apart all at once. They unravel in small moments, tiny threads that snap slowly, one by one, until the whole thing quietly comes undone. But in the beginning, I never imagined that this would be our story. I truly believed we had something real. Something worth holding on to. I met him during one of the busiest, most confusing phases of my life. I had just started balancing work, personal projects, and trying to figure out who I was as an adult. My days felt long and heavy, and even though I had family and friends, I still felt alone sometimes. You know how life gets. You start going through the motions, and before you know it, you forget what genuine connection even feels like. And then he came along. He wasn't a dramatic entrance in my life. He didn't sweep me off my feet or make grand gestures. He was simply kind, warm, attentive. He made effort in ways that felt sincere. He asked about my day with real interest. He remembered the little details I mentioned. He laughed at my strange jokes even when they weren't funny. He made me feel seen at a time when I desperately needed to feel that. Our first few months together felt peaceful, almost soft. We would go on long walks in the evening, sharing quiet stories about our childhoods. He would hold my hand and gently squeeze it every few minutes without saying anything, as if he wanted to remind me he was there. At night, we would sit together on his balcony, feet up, sipping tea while talking about our dreams and plans. He said he wanted a simple life, a house, a family, stability. Nothing flashy, nothing extraordinary, just something steady. I found comfort in that. Maybe because I had grown up watching people chase big dreams while forgetting to nurture the small things. Maybe because a part of me longed for calmness more than excitement. Or maybe because I thought simplicity meant safety. My family liked him too. They said he was polite, respectful, and grounded. My closest friends said he seemed sweet and that he looked at me with admiration. Even my co-workers, who met him only once at a small office gathering, said he seemed like a man who valued quiet stability. Looking back, I don't think anyone was wrong. He did value stability. He did want a simple life. But what none of us realized then was that his definition of simple came with expectations he never openly explained. Expectations I wouldn't understand until much later. Our relationship settled into a routine after the first year. It wasn't bad, not at all. It was ordinary, calm, predictable. We spent weekends at his place. We cooked together while playing music. We watched movies and talked about nothing important. I helped him with errands. He helped me with my car problems and small things around my apartment. It felt like the beginning of a life we might build together someday. And because it felt safe, I opened myself more. I shared deeper parts of my past, my insecurities, the quiet fears I didn't tell many people. He listened. Sometimes he held my hands. Sometimes he hugged me close and said, "I'm here, okay." In those moments, I believed I had found someone who understood me. But small signs always appear long before you're ready to see them. For example, I remember one evening when I mentioned that I wanted to take a career development course. It was something I had dreamed of for a while. It would require a few weeks of evening classes, but nothing too demanding. He frowned and asked, "Why do you want to stress yourself with all that? Isn't your current job enough?" I laughed it off and said it was just something I felt passionate about. He shrugged and changed the subject. That was the first time something inside me felt off. It wasn't a big argument. It wasn't an insult. It was just a moment where I felt unsupported. But because everything else seemed fine, I ignored it. Another time, he joked lightly, casually, that I made better tea than his mother ever did. He said it while smiling, and at that time it sounded like a compliment. But now that I look back, I realize he said things like that often. Comments about how I took care of him, how I kept his space tidy, how I cooked certain dishes better than anyone he knew. Again, none of it was rude. None of it felt wrong. But these comments slowly built an expectation, one I didn't fully understand until much later. The first real shift happened about a year and a half into the relationship. By then, we were comfortable, maybe too comfortable. I started noticing that he had become less attentive, not cold, but distant. He stopped asking about my day the way he used to. He didn't notice when I looked tired or when I struggled with work. He didn't check in with me during busy weeks like he once did. I brought it up gently one evening, telling him that I felt a little neglected. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just honest. He sighed and said, "You're overthinking again. Everything is fine." I asked, "Are you sure?" He nodded without even looking at me. That night, I felt something tight inside my chest, a small knot of confusion and hurt. But again, I let it go. We went on like this for months. The small things kept piling up, but quietly. Nothing loud enough to call a problem, yet painful enough for me to feel alone. I started noticing that he expected more from me. Small responsibilities, tasks, quiet routines he just assumed I would do. If I didn't make tea before he asked, he would comment that I had forgot. If I didn't tidy something during my stay, he would laugh and say, "You're becoming like me, lazy." If I wanted to spend a weekend at my own place because I needed time alone, he would act disappointed, as if I had taken something away from him. Still, nothing big enough to walk away from, nothing terrible, just little slices of discomfort that I kept swallowing. The first real shock came when he casually mentioned his future plans. We were sitting on the floor after dinner, talking about everything and nothing, when he said, "You know, once we move in together, I imagine you taking care of the home. Like full time, I think you'd be really good at that." I blinked, confused. "Full time as in being a housewife?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think that's the best arrangement for us. It fits your personality, and I'll be working anyway, so it makes sense." I remember feeling two emotions at the same time, a strange sadness and a quiet disbelief. I said softly, "But I want to work. I want my own income, my own independence." He shrugged. "Work if you want, but I prefer if you don't. I want someone who's there. Someone who takes care of things at home, someone who supports me." I tried to explain that I had dreams, that I wanted to build a career, that I didn't want to depend on anyone financially. But he brushed it off with a small smile and said, "You're worrying too much. Life will be easier this way." The worst part, he didn't say it to control me. He said it like it was the most normal expectation in the world. That night, I went home with a heavy heart. For the first time in our relationship, I felt truly misunderstood. Not because he expected something from me, but because he never even asked what I wanted. And slowly, the gentle beginning we had started fading. The soft moments became rare. His voice became impatient more often. His comments became sharper. His expectations grew heavier. I kept trying. I kept explaining. I kept hoping he would see me the way he did in the beginning. But instead, the more I tried to express myself, the more he acted like my feelings were burdens. There were days when I sat in my car after visiting him, just resting my head on the steering wheel, wondering why I felt more stressed with him than without him. Days when I cried quietly in the shower because I didn't want anyone to know how lonely I felt while being in a relationship. But we had been together for a long time, 2.5 years, and I didn't want to throw it away. I didn't want to admit that I had invested myself into something that might not be right for me. I didn't want to accept that the person who once made me feel safe now made me feel small. So I stayed. I stayed and kept trying. I stayed and kept hoping. I stayed and kept believing that maybe things would go back to how they were in the beginning. But deep down, I knew something was changing. Something slowly breaking. And the scariest part was that I didn't know how to stop it. If someone asked me when exactly things started to fall apart, I don't think I could point to a single day. It wasn't one fight. It wasn't one mistake. It was a slow drift, a quiet emotional distance that grew between us until it felt like an entire world. But at the time, I kept ignoring the signs. I kept telling myself that relationships go through phases, that people change over time, that we just needed to communicate better, that if I loved him deeply enough, everything would eventually feel right again. Maybe that was my biggest mistake, believing that love alone could fix what was breaking. About 2 years into our relationship, something shifted in our dynamic. He became more impatient, not dramatically, but enough for me to feel it. If I was slow choosing a place to eat, he would sigh loudly. If I asked him for help with something, he would say, later, but later rarely came. If I disagreed with him, even gently, his tone would turn defensive. And when I pointed out these small changes, he always had the same response. You're being too sensitive. I heard that phrase so many times that I started questioning my own emotions. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I was creating problems where none existed. That's the danger of emotional distance. It makes you doubt your own reality. One night, I remember sitting on his couch while he scrolled on his phone. I tried to tell him about something that happened at work, something that had upset me. I was looking for comfort, maybe a kind word, or even just a little attention. But he didn't look up even once. He kept nodding at the wrong moments, giving automatic, yeah, right responses. Finally, I stopped talking. He didn't notice. I sat there silently, staring at the side of his face, wondering how a person who once made me feel so deeply understood could now make me feel invisible. His expectations of me became clearer as time passed. Some were small, almost harmless on the surface. Others cut deeper, revealing a version of our future that I did not want. For example, he began to believe that taking care of him was part of my role. If I came over, I was expected to help with cooking. If I stayed the weekend, I was expected to tidy up. If we planned something together, it was my responsibility to organize it. Not because he asked with kindness. Not because it was a shared effort. But because, in his mind, I was the person who would naturally do these things once we married. He never used the word housewife again after that first conversation, but his actions spoke it for him. One Saturday morning, he woke up late and wandered into the kitchen while I was making breakfast. He leaned against the counter and said casually, "This is nice. You know, this is exactly what I imagine for our future, you handling the home stuff while I handle the outside stuff." I tried to smile, but something inside me tightened. I asked gently, "And what about my work, my goals?" He shrugged. "We'll figure it out. But honestly, I prefer if you don't work. It's less stress for everyone." Everyone, as if I wasn't someone too. The strangest thing about loneliness is that it can happen even when someone is sitting right next to you. And that is exactly what started happening to me. I remember a night when we were watching a movie together. He was lying on the couch, his head on my lap, scrolling on his phone. The movie was just background noise. I looked down at him and realized I didn't feel connected to him anymore. He was there physically, but emotionally, he felt miles away. He rarely asked how I was feeling. He rarely noticed when something was bothering me. If I sounded low, he would respond with a quick, "You're tired," and then go back to whatever he was doing. Sometimes he would joke that I was too emotional, and I would laugh with him just to avoid sounding defensive. But every time, a part of me felt smaller. When you love someone, you try to hold on. You tell yourself that phases come and go. I kept telling myself that too. But deep down, I started feeling a quiet fear. What if this isn't a phase? What if this is who he really is? And what if I'm losing myself trying to keep this together? Small misunderstandings became common. Not because they were serious, but because any time I expressed a feeling, he took it as criticism. One evening, I told him gently, "I feel like we don't spend enough quality time together." His response was immediate. "What do you mean? I spend all my free time with you." "How can you say that?" I tried to explain that being in the same room scrolling on our phones wasn't the same as quality time. He shook his head and said, "You're never satisfied." The conversation ended with me feeling guilty, though I wasn't sure why. Another time, I mentioned that I felt overwhelmed balancing work and personal responsibilities. Instead of comfort, he said, "Maybe you should stop overthinking everything, just relax." I didn't want advice. I just wanted understanding. But even that felt like too much to ask. One of the turning points for me, though I didn't fully understand it then, was my birthday. Not the big fight kind of moment, just a small, quiet heartbreak. He forgot. He didn't realize until noon when he saw a notification on social media. He called me and said, "Oh, it's today, I thought it was next week." He didn't sound apologetic, more annoyed at himself than sorry. I laughed it off because I didn't want to sound childish. I told him it was fine. I told him I didn't want anything big. And yet, later that night, as I sat in my room reading the birthday wishes my friends sent, I cried quietly. Not because he didn't get me a gift, not because he forgot the date, but because I saw clearly, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't a priority for him anymore. I wasn't even on his mental list of important things to remember. A few weeks later, something happened that still sits with me. We were at his place. I had cooked dinner because he said he was tired. After eating, I sat next to him hoping we could talk or watch something together. He picked up his phone and started messaging someone. He didn't even glance at me. I leaned on his shoulder. He didn't react, not even a slight shift. I sat there for almost 20 minutes before quietly standing up. I walked to the balcony and sat alone for a while, watching the lights from distant buildings. He didn't come after me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't notice anything. That night, as I sat outside, I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but in a tired, defeated way. I whispered to myself, "This is not love, at least not the kind I want." Arguments weren't loud between us. They weren't filled with shouting. They were calm but deeply hurtful. He would shut down emotionally. He would twist every concern I expressed into something about him being attacked. Whenever I said, "I feel lonely," he responded, "You always think the worst of me." When I said, "I feel unsupported," he said, "You're imagining things." When I said, "I need your attention sometimes," he said, "I'm tired. Can't you understand that?" It was like talking to a wall that always believed it was being painted the wrong color. I started choosing silence over honesty because silence was easier. Silence didn't start arguments. Silence didn't make him defensive. Silence didn't make me feel guilty. But silence also killed something inside me slowly. The real conflict began taking shape when he became more open about expecting me to be at home in the future. One night, while discussing random things, he said, "I don't like career women who prioritize work over family. It creates problems." I froze for a moment before asking, "Do you see me that way?" He shrugged. "You're not like that. You're more traditional. You'd make a perfect housewife." Perfect housewife, not partner, not equal, not someone with her own dreams, just a role, a label. I swallowed my hurt and asked softly, "But I don't want to stop working." He laughed lightly. "Everyone says that at first, you'll change your mind." Something about that confidence, that assurance that my choices meant nothing, deeply unsettled me. It was the first time I realized the future he imagined didn't include my independence. It included my service. After that conversation, something changed in me. I didn't feel as excited to see him. I didn't feel as safe sharing my thoughts. I didn't feel hopeful about the future the same way I once did, but I didn't tell him yet. I was scared of being misunderstood again. Meanwhile, he seemed completely unaware of my emotional distance. Or maybe he noticed, but he didn't care enough to ask why. He was busier with work now, more stressed, more distracted. I tried to be supportive. I brought him food on weekends. I helped with his laundry. I listened to his frustrations. But when I needed support, he wasn't there. He didn't see my tired eyes. He didn't hear the shake in my voice when I talked about my long days. He didn't notice that I was slowly disappearing behind my own smile. One evening, after a long week, I told him I felt exhausted and emotionally drained. He didn't look up from his screen. He just said, "We all have long weeks. Don't dramatize it." I remember sitting still, staring at nothing, thinking, how did I become someone whose pain feels like an inconvenience to the person I love? Around the 2.5-year mark, things hit their peak. I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't respected. I felt like someone who existed to make his life easier while my own needs were ignored. The emotional distance became so wide that even when we sat together, I felt like I was alone in the room. He had become so comfortable, so sure of me staying, that he stopped trying altogether, stopped caring, stopped seeing me. And when I tried talking about it, when I tried expressing my hurt, when I tried to explain how unloved I felt, he didn't listen. He got defensive. He twisted my words. He made himself the victim. The saddest part was that I still kept hoping. I still believed we could fix things. I still believed he would hear me if I explained in the right tone, the right words. Right time, but nothing worked. Not because I didn't choose my words kindly, but because he never intended to listen. The final conflict, the one that changed everything, happened quietly. I had reached a point where I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed clarity. I needed to know whether he valued me. I needed to know whether we still had a future. So one night, with a soft voice and a heavy heart, I sat him down and said, "We need to talk. I need to tell you how I've been feeling." I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I wasn't emotional. I was just tired, tired of trying alone. He leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "Okay, what now?" I told him everything, that I felt lonely, that I felt unappreciated, that his words about me being a housewife scared me, that his defensiveness made me feel unheard, that I needed emotional support, that I wanted to feel like his partner again. He didn't take a breath before responding. He said, "So basically everything I do is wrong." I shook my head. "No, I just want us to talk. I just want us to understand each other." But he kept going. "You always complain. You never see what I do. You make me feel like a bad boyfriend." Those words, they were a mirror of every conflict we ever had. He wasn't listening. He wasn't trying to understand. He wasn't even open to hearing how I felt. Instead, he made himself the victim once again. And in that moment, I knew nothing would change. I knew he would never see me. I knew he would never make space for my emotions. Something inside me broke quietly, not out of anger, not out of shock, but out of clarity. I realized he wasn't my partner anymore. Maybe he never was. He was someone who wanted comfort, not connection, obedience, not understanding, a helper, not a partner. And I couldn't stay anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood up, walked to the bedroom, and packed the small things I had left at his place. He didn't follow me. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't stop me. When I came back out with my bag, he stared at me with confusion. "Where are you going?" I said quietly. "Home." "Why? I think you know why." He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften. He just looked annoyed. Annoyed that I wasn't staying. Annoyed that I wasn't bending again. I walked out. And when the cold night air touched my face, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. A deep, slow breath filled my chest, and I whispered to myself, "I'm done." I blocked his number. I blocked him on every platform, not out of anger, but because I needed peace. I needed silence. I needed myself back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt relief. A quiet, gentle relief. I still remember the night everything changed. Sometimes I replay it in my mind, not because I enjoy the memory, but because it became the moment I finally saw the truth I had been avoiding for years. It was quiet outside, a soft kind of night, the kind where the world feels gentle and the silence feels like it's waiting for something. I walked into his apartment with that same hope I always carried inside me, the hope that this time would be different, that this time he would hear me. That this time he would show even a small sign that he cared about us. But even as I stepped inside, I felt the old, familiar weight in my chest, the one that came from walking into someone else's world, yet never truly belonging there. He was on his phone, scrolling, barely noticing I had entered. I stood there for a moment, watching him, the person I had given 2.5 years of my life to. The man I had defended, supported, waited for, and cared about, even when I was the one hurting. And he didn't even lift his head. I sat on the edge of the sofa quietly, letting the silence fill the space between us. I had rehearsed my words many times. I didn't want anger. I didn't want a fight. I only wanted a conversation, one honest moment between the two of us. One moment where my feelings mattered too. He eventually turned toward me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look away. "I want to talk," I said softly. He sighed immediately. That heavy, annoyed sigh. "Again," he said. "About what now?" His tone was like a small knife. Nothing sharp enough to leave a wound, but painful enough to remind me that I had been hurting for a very long time. I tried to stay calm. I kept my voice low, steady, gentle. "I feel like you've been dismissing me. I feel alone in this relationship. And when you talk about your expectations, especially about me becoming a housewife, it makes me feel unappreciated, like my dreams don't matter." He turned his face away as if my words were an inconvenience. "Why do you always make yourself the victim?" he muttered. I blinked, slowly. I was trying to explain my feelings, but he was already pushing them aside. "I'm not trying to be a victim," I whispered. "I just want you to listen. I want to feel valued. I want to know that you see me as your partner, not someone who exists to serve your needs." He leaned back, irritation clear in his eyes. "So now I'm controlling." "That's what you're trying to say." I shook my head gently. "No, I'm saying I need respect, I need kindness, I need us to be a team." But the moment I said the word team, something inside him snapped. He raised his voice slightly, not loud, not aggressive, just sharp enough to make me feel like the bad one. "You never think about me," he said. "You only talk about what you want. What about my feelings? What about what I go through? You act like I don't sacrifice anything." I sat there quietly, letting his words sink into the air between us. It wasn't the first time he reacted this way. It wasn't the first time he turned the entire conversation into something about him. It wasn't the first time I felt guilty for asking for basic respect. But this time, something inside me shifted. Because for the first time, I wasn't sad. I wasn't confused. I wasn't trying to understand him. For the first time, I felt a clarity. A deep, calm clarity. As he continued talking, or rather, defending himself without hearing a single word I had said, my heart began to move on its own, slowly pulling away from him. Not with anger, not with resentment, just with quiet acceptance. Acceptance that this was who he was. Acceptance that love alone was not enough. Acceptance that staying with him meant losing myself. When he finished speaking, he looked at me as if expecting an apology. He always expected one. I simply nodded. Not because he was right, but because I realized I didn't want to argue anymore. He didn't notice the difference. He didn't see the shift in my eyes. He didn't understand that I had reached the end of something that had been breaking for a long time. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said, almost dismissively. "But honestly, you need to grow up. You need to stop being so sensitive. You make small things huge. You ruin everything with your emotions." My emotions. The same emotions I had been burying for years. The same emotions I softened for him, hid for him, toned down for him. The same emotions I thought he might someday appreciate or at least understand. I looked at him, really looked. And I realized I was sitting next to a man who never truly saw me. Not the real me. Not the woman who tried her best. Not the woman who stayed loyal, patient, soft, and warm. He saw the version of me that existed for his convenience. Nothing more. And that realization, it didn't break me, it freed me. I stood up slowly. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't tremble. "I think I understand," I said quietly. He frowned. "What do you understand?" But I didn't answer that question. Instead, I walked to the corner of the room where a small bag of my things still remained, things I had slowly brought over during our relationship, hoping one day this space would feel like a shared home. I picked up the bag gently. He watched me with confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked, annoyance rising in his voice. I didn't look up. I folded a shirt that had been lying on the back of a chair. I placed my charger into the side pocket. I checked the drawer for anything I may have left. He stood up, now clearly irritated. Why are you packing your stuff? We're in the middle of a conversation. I finally turned to him, and for the first time he saw something different in my eyes. A softness without fear. A calmness without attachment. A quiet strength I didn't know I had. We're not in a conversation, I said gently. I'm speaking, you're defending. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but I raised my hand not to stop him but to offer a silent boundary. I'm not angry, I whispered. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I need peace, and I don't have peace here. He scoffed lightly, shaking his head. So you're leaving, just like that? I took a slow breath. I think I already left a long time ago. Tonight, I'm just understanding it. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic, I smiled sadly. No, I'm finally being honest. He grew frustrated again, but this time his frustration didn't wrap itself around me. It didn't make me feel guilty. It didn't make me question myself. I zipped my bag. He followed me toward the door, still talking, still trying to explain himself, justify himself, protect his pride. But his words felt distant. The more he spoke, the more I felt sure of my decision. When I reached the door, I turned around one last time. I cared about you, I said softly. Maybe too much, maybe more than you ever realized, but I can't stay in a place where my feelings don't matter. I can't build a future where I'm expected to shrink myself. His face hardened. Fine, leave then, don't come back. I nodded. That's the plan. And then I stepped outside. The hallway felt cold, but also strangely comforting. Every step I took away from his apartment felt like a step back toward myself. I didn't cry. I didn't regret. I didn't look back. Once I reached the street, I pulled out my phone and blocked his number. Not because I hated him. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I needed peace, and he wasn't capable of giving it to me. As I walked home, a calm relief slowly spread through me, a feeling I had forgotten existed. A feeling I had been searching for without knowing it. I wasn't walking away from love. I was walking away from pain. I was walking away from quiet disrespect. I was walking away from a future that didn't include my dreams. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew this. I had chosen myself. And that choice, that small brave choice, became the turning point of my entire life. When I walked out of his apartment that night, I thought the turning point was only about the moment I decided to leave. But as I moved deeper into the quiet street, I realized something more. The turning point had started long before that conversation. It had begun in the silent places inside my heart, in the moments when I swallowed my feelings just to keep the peace, and in the days when I convinced myself that loving him was enough to fill all the empty spaces between us. I kept walking slowly, not rushing, not running, just letting each step guide me forward. The air felt cooler than usual. Maybe it was always this cool at night, and I just never noticed because my mind was always full of worries, full of questions, full of emotional exhaustion. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, my mind felt quiet, not empty, just quiet. I found myself thinking back on the early days of our relationship. The days when everything felt soft and easy. Back then, it felt like we understood each other without needing too many words. I used to admire the way he listened, or at least the way I believed he listened. I used to love the way he spoke about the future, with confidence and clarity. He sounded like someone who knew exactly what he wanted from life, and for a long time, I thought that made him mature. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing that everything he wanted was shaped only by his own needs. His plans always included me, but they never really considered me. And somehow, without realizing it, I kept adjusting myself to fit into the spaces he created, spaces that were sometimes too small for my heart, too narrow for my dreams, and too cold for my feelings. Maybe the turning point wasn't a single night. Maybe it was all the quiet moments I ignored. Maybe it was all the little pieces of myself I gave up one by one. As I continued walking, I passed the small cafe where we had our first real date. The lights were off, chairs stacked on tables, sign turned to closed. I paused for a moment and looked at the window. I could almost see our younger selves sitting inside me smiling nervously, him leaning back confidently, telling stories about his life and asking only a few questions about mine. Back then, I found it charming. I liked hearing him talk. I liked the certainty in his voice. It took me 2.5 years to understand that certainty without empathy becomes control, and confidence without listening becomes dismissal, and love without respect becomes imbalance. As I stood there, looking at the empty tables through the glass, I whispered softly to myself, "I'm not the same girl anymore." And I felt a small warmth inside, a quiet promise that I would never again shrink myself just to keep someone else comfortable. I kept walking. The streetlights stretched their glow across the pavement, making long shadows behind me. At one point, I stepped into the light and saw my reflection faintly on a closed shop window. I looked tired but not broken, a little sad but not lost. My face looked softer somehow, as if letting go had given it room to breathe. I sat on a bench nearby, letting the night settle around me. I could hear distant cars, light wind brushing against the trees, and my own breathing. Slow, steady, calm. I took out my phone and opened our chat. It was the last thing I needed to do before blocking him. I scrolled through the messages, the old sweet ones, the long conversations, the short arguments, the unanswered texts, the ones where I apologized even when I didn't need to. I realized how many messages were me trying to make things right, trying to understand him, trying to fix the distance growing between us. I closed the chat slowly. Then I blocked his number. Then I blocked his social accounts. And then I simply sat there. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel regret. What I felt was a sense of release, like I had been holding my breath for years without knowing it and now finally exhaled. I looked up at the sky, and even though it was dark, I felt something open inside me, a small, hopeful space I hadn't felt in so long. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I didn't have to justify my feelings. A life where I didn't have to walk on emotional eggshells. A life where I could dream freely, grow freely, and love freely, without fear of being too much or not enough. The thought brought a gentle warmth to my chest. After a few minutes, I stood up again. I knew I had to keep moving, but I didn't feel rushed. Each step felt deliberate, like I was taking my life back piece by piece. As I walked, I remembered another moment, one that I hadn't thought about in a long time. It was about 8 months into our relationship. We had gone to a friend's gathering. I was sitting beside him, listening to everyone talk. At one point, someone asked me about my goals, what I wanted to do with my life, what dreams I had. Before I could answer, he spoke for me. "She doesn't care much about career," he said casually. "She'll probably just be a housewife, that's what she's comfortable with." Everyone nodded politely. But I remember sitting there, staring at him, feeling a small sting inside. I had never said that, I had never expressed that desire. And he spoke as if he knew everything about me, as if my future belonged to him, not me. When we got in the car later that night, I tried to bring it up gently. "I didn't like that," I said. "You made it sound like I don't have ambitions." He brushed it off. "It was just a joke. Don't make everything so serious." And just like that, a part of me folded quietly. A part of me that mattered. And I stayed silent because I didn't want to ruin the evening. I stayed silent because he became cold whenever I expressed hurt. I stayed silent because loving him made me believe that my feelings were less important. I didn't know it then, but moments like that planted seeds, seeds of discomfort, seeds of doubt, seeds of emotional distance. And over time, those seeds grew into quiet sadness. As I walked home now, remembering these moments, I felt a strange sense of understanding. Not regret, just understanding. I wasn't blind. I wasn't weak. I wasn't foolish. I was in love. And love, especially when we are young and hopeful, can make us overlook the very things that end up hurting us the most. But the beauty of life is that we learn, even from pain, especially from pain. I kept walking until I reached a small intersection. The light turned red, so I stood there, waiting patiently. As the world paused with me, I felt a gentle heaviness in my chest, not the kind that drags you down, but the kind that reminds you of everything you've survived. I thought about the last 2.5 years and realized something important. Leaving him wasn't the turning point. Choosing myself was. And that decision had started long before I ever picked up my bag. I remembered the nights when I cried quietly, hoping he would notice my sadness. I remembered the days when I gave up small parts of myself to keep the peace. I remembered how often I felt alone even while sitting right next to him. Those were the true turning points. Little moments that whispered to me, "You deserve better, you deserve respect, you deserve a voice, you deserve love that doesn't make you feel small," but I kept ignoring those whispers. I wasn't ready then. Tonight I was. When the light turned green, I stepped forward. And for the first time, it felt like the world was stepping forward with me. As I approached my building, I felt my phone vibrate. My heart beat a little faster for a moment, but when I checked, it was just a notification from a random app. Not him. And I was grateful. I didn't want him to reach out. I didn't want apologies or explanations. I didn't want promises he would never keep. I wanted silence. A silence where I could breathe again. A silence where my thoughts were finally my own. A silence where my heart could heal without being pulled back into old patterns. When I entered my room, I placed my bag on the floor and sat on my bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, just feeling the quiet around me. It didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. I lay down, still fully dressed, still holding onto the final wave of emotions. And slowly, I let myself feel everything. The hurt, the disappointment, the relief, the freedom. I realized that breaking up with him didn't break me. Losing him didn't mean losing my future. Ending the relationship didn't mean failing. It meant choosing a new beginning. A beginning I was finally ready for. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered softly into the darkness, "I'm proud of you." Because for the first time in so long, I truly was. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because my mind felt strangely awake, as if it knew a new chapter had begun and wanted me to see it clearly. For a moment, I lay still in bed, listening to the soft sounds of the world outside, a few cars passing, birds chirping lightly, someone closing a gate in the distance. Normal sounds, everyday sounds. But somehow they felt different today. Maybe because I was different. There was no heaviness in my chest, no nervous expectation of a message, no quiet fear of another argument waiting to happen. There was only space, a gentle, open space where I could finally breathe. I sat up slowly, letting the morning light fall across my room. It felt warm on my skin, comforting in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked around, realizing how long it had been since my room felt like my own space and not just a place I stayed when I wasn't with him. I took a long breath and whispered to myself, "You're okay, you're going to be okay." And for the first time, those words felt true. I got out of bed quietly and made my way to the kitchen. My hands moved automatically, filling the kettle, placing it on the stove, setting out a cup. There was something soothing about these simple actions. No one was judging me. No one was expecting anything from me. No one was waiting to criticize the way I did things or the timing of them. It was just me. Just my small morning routine, just my peace. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, watching the steam rise slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone constantly. I didn't feel any pressure to be anywhere or do anything. It was a different kind of silence, not lonely, not empty, but peaceful. As the tea warmed me from the inside, memories from the past years began to come gently. No longer like sharp pains, but like soft reminders of what I had lived through. I remembered all the times I adjusted my plans for him, all the times I waited for him to be emotionally available, all the times I smiled through hurt because I hoped tomorrow would be better. And it wasn't that he was always unkind. There were good moments too. There were times when he held me gently, times when we laughed, times when he shared dreams with me. But love isn't measured by the good moments alone. It's measured by how we treat each other during the difficult ones. And we, or maybe just he, didn't do well in those moments. As I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, I realized something important. The relationship ended long before I walked away. What ended last night was the hope I kept holding on to. And letting go of that hope felt like slowly unclenching a fist I didn't know had been tight for so long. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. I didn't reach for it immediately. I just let it ring. When I finally picked it up, I saw messages from friends and two from my cousin. Simple messages, nothing dramatic. There were no messages from him, of course, but that didn't disappoint me. It reassured me. It told me that my decision was the right one. After finishing my tea, I decided to go for a walk. Not to clear my mind, because for once it wasn't clouded, but to reconnect with myself. I put on a light jacket and stepped outside. The air felt fresh, the sky bright but gentle, the sidewalks calm. As I walked, I noticed things I had been too distracted to see before: the shape of the trees on my street, the little flowers someone had planted near a gate, the soft laughter of children playing in a nearby yard. Life around me felt alive, and I felt like I was finally becoming part of it again. I reached a small park near my home, a place I used to visit often before my life became too wrapped around his schedule, his moods, his expectations. I sat on a bench under a large tree, feeling its shade settle over me like a comforting hand. I watched people pass by: an older couple walking slowly holding hands, a young mother pushing a stroller, a teenager running with headphones on. They all looked peaceful, living their own lives, moving at their own pace. I wondered when I had stopped doing that, moving at my own pace. Sitting there, I realized that somewhere along the relationship, I had stopped growing. I had stopped nurturing myself. I had stopped dreaming freely. Everything had revolved around what he wanted, what he needed, what he expected. And because he never truly noticed my sacrifices, I began to believe they weren't important. But they were. They always were. Sometimes, the resolution after a painful ending doesn't come from sudden joy or new beginnings. Sometimes, it comes from gentle realizations like these: small truths that bloom slowly when the heart finally has room. I leaned back against the bench and closed my eyes. I told myself softly, I'm not going to lose myself again. No matter who comes into my life in the future, I won't forget myself in the process. That promise felt like a quiet seed planted in my soul. After some time, I went back home and decided to clean my room. Not because it was messy, but because cleaning felt symbolic, like making space for new energy. I folded clothes, rearranged my books, dusted shelves, and opened the windows to let fresh air in. With every small task, I felt pieces of myself returning. While cleaning, I found a small box where I had kept a few things from our relationship: ticket stubs, photos, small gifts, tiny notes. I sat on the floor, holding the box for a moment, then opening it gently. Each item inside held a memory, but none of them hurt the way I expected. They felt distant, like memories from another life, another version of me. I didn't feel the need to burn them or throw them away dramatically. I just felt a sense of closure. I put everything back in the box, tied it carefully, and placed it on the top shelf of my closet, not out of guilt or longing, but out of respect for the person I was back then. She loved sincerely. She tried genuinely. She gave wholeheartedly. She deserved to be remembered with kindness. By the afternoon, I felt lighter, not excited, not happy, but grounded, and that was enough. Later that day, my best friend called me. "I heard," she said softly. I didn't ask how news travels fast among people who love you. "Are you okay?" she asked. I took a slow breath and answered honestly, "I think I'm finally becoming okay." She stayed silent for a moment, maybe surprised by my calmness. Then she said, "You sound different." I smiled. "I feel different." We talked for a while about simple things, funny things, comforting things. And talking to her reminded me how good it felt to be myself, without fear of judgment, without worrying about someone's mood, without walking on emotional eggshells. After the call, I made myself a warm meal, something simple but comforting. As I ate, I realized how long it had been since I enjoyed a meal without feeling emotionally drained. Later in the evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset. The colors spread across the sky in soft oranges and pinks, fading slowly into purple. It felt symbolic, like the closing of a chapter. And somewhere in that fading light, I realized something else. I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't bitter. I didn't hate him. What I felt was acceptance. We were not right for each other. He couldn't love me the way I needed. And I couldn't keep losing myself trying to teach him how. That wasn't love, that was survival. And love shouldn't feel like survival. I whispered quietly, more to myself than to him, "I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope I find myself." The resolution wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It wasn't full of sudden revelations, it was gentle, soft, quiet. It was me slowly returning to myself. Over the next few days, I slept better, I ate better. I laughed unexpectedly at small things. I talked to people I hadn't spoken to in months. I made plans for myself, small ones like reading more, taking evening walks, trying new recipes. Nothing big, just pieces of my life coming back to me. And one evening, while journaling, I wrote something that captured the heart of my healing. I didn't lose a future. I saved myself from a life where I wasn't seen. That simple sentence carried a whole world of truth. The resolution wasn't about getting over him. It was about finding myself again, my voice, my dreams, my boundaries, my inner peace. And every day I felt myself growing a little more. Sometimes healing looks like crying in the shower. Sometimes it looks like staring at the ceiling in silence. But sometimes it looks like sitting at your window with a calm heart, realizing you survived something that once felt impossible. That's what resolution felt like to me, not victory, not joy, not triumph, but peace. A quiet, steady peace I had been longing for all along. I don't know how long I sat there after that, maybe minutes, maybe an hour. Time had no shape anymore. I was just a mother, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, inside a house that never should have been mine, trying to understand how life had twisted itself into knots around me. My son's quiet breathing finally pulled me back to the moment. He had curled up against a pillow, completely unaware of the storms that had passed over our heads. I tucked the blanket around him again, brushing a hand through his hair. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time: clarity. Not peace, not closure, but clarity. Clarity that the life I had been trying so hard to fix wasn't mine anymore. Clarity that loving someone wasn't the same as living for them. Clarity that my son deserved a mother who wasn't constantly drowning. My hands trembled as I stood up. This house felt too quiet now, too still. Like the world had paused just long enough for me to finally decide what came next. I walked out into the living room where the woman, my sister-in-law, sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't crying anymore, just breathing heavily, like someone who had run too far and finally collapsed. When she looked up at me, her eyes were swollen and exhausted. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, "for everything. You didn't deserve any of this." I didn't answer right away. There were no right words for a moment like this, so I sat down across from her quietly, letting the silence settle between us. For a long moment, we just existed, two women whose lives had been shattered by the same man in different ways. Finally, she spoke again, her voice thin and fragile. "Do you hate me?" I exhaled slowly. "I don't," I said softly. "I can't, I don't even have any space left for hate, I'm too tired." A small, broken smile flickered across her lips. "I know I ruined everything," she whispered. "No," I said gently, shaking my head. "He did, you were hurting, you were lonely, you were vulnerable, and he knew exactly how to use that." She wiped her cheeks again, this time with a little more anger. "I believed him," she said. "I believed every sweet lie he fed me, I thought he loved me." I nodded slowly. I believed the same thing. We stared at each other in painful understanding. After a moment, she hesitated before asking, "What will you do now?" I looked down at my hands. I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times already tonight. I began slowly, I think I'm done fighting for a place in someone's life who never fought to keep me in it." She closed her eyes as another tear escaped. I continued softly, "But I also think I need time. A little time to breathe. To think, to decide what kind of life I want for my son and for myself." She nodded gently. "If you need this house for a few days or weeks, take it. I'll leave, you shouldn't have to run, I will." I was stunned. "You don't have to, no," she cut in quietly but firmly. "I do. This house carries the weight of the mistake I made, but you should rest, just rest." I swallowed hard, overwhelmed. "Thank you," I whispered. She stood up slowly, as if every step was made of guilt and regret. Before going to pack her things, she paused. "One more thing," she said, turning back to me. I looked up. "I'm not going back to him," she whispered. "Not ever, I know that doesn't erase anything, but I want you to know I'm choosing myself this time." I nodded. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. When she left the room, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Really breathe. The house was quiet again, but not the suffocating kind of quiet. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts for the first time. The sky outside had turned a soft bluish gray. Early morning light filtered in gently. My son hadn't stirred once. His innocence shielded him from the heaviness of the night. I walked into the kitchen. There was only one working bulb, flickering slightly, giving everything a soft, warm glow. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from exhaustion. I leaned against the counter, letting the coolness of the glass steady me. A strange sense of calm wrapped around me, a fragile, trembling calm, but calm still. I wasn't healed, I was okay, but I was clearer than I'd been in months, and that was something. My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at it but didn't pick it up. I didn't need to, I already knew who it was. My husband. His name lit up the screen like a ghost trying to claw its way back into my life. He had called earlier too, and texted, and sent voice notes, but I hadn't responded. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to explain myself. I didn't owe him my pain, I didn't owe him my excuses, I didn't owe him anything. I let the phone buzz, then fall silent. A part of me wondered what he might be thinking, if he was panicking, if he was angry, if he was scared. But then another part of me, a part I didn't know I had, realized something important. His feelings were not my responsibility anymore. My only responsibility now was my son and myself. The sister-in-law came out with 2 suitcases. She paused near the door, looking around the house one last time. "This place feels poison now," she whispered. I nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "If you ever need help, not advice, not opinions, just help, call me, I won't fail you again." I offered her a small, tired smile. "Take care of yourself," I said softly. "You too," she replied with a trembling voice. Then she left, just like that. The house was mine. The silence was mine. The decision of what comes next was mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, each step reminding me that this space, though borrowed, broken, and temporary, was a place where I could breathe. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was just resting, and somehow that felt powerful. I sat on the front steps while my son colored inside. The sun warmed my shoulders, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a shadow of myself. People walked by, looking at me curiously. They didn't know my story. They didn't know my pain. To them, I was just a quiet woman sitting alone on a porch. But inside, something was shifting. Something small, something gentle, a seed of strength. A soft beginning. A whisper of who I could be if I allowed myself to grow again. Later, I cooked something simple. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My son ate beside me with his usual chatter, completely unaware that I was rebuilding myself one breath at a time. Every minute felt like a small reclaiming. A reclaiming of my peace, my autonomy, my choices, my life. When I finally lay down beside my sleeping son, I didn't cry. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like crying. A quiet heaviness lingered in my chest, but not the suffocating kind. It was the heaviness of release, of acceptance, of letting go. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if my husband would show up. I didn't know what decisions I would have to make. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never allow myself to disappear again. My son deserved a mother who showed him what strength looked like, and I deserved to remember myself again. As I closed my eyes, one final thought settled over me: maybe this isn't the end at all. Maybe it's the first real beginning. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, not happier, just clearer. I woke up before the sun, lying on my side with my son's little hand resting on my arm. His slow breathing filled the quiet room like a tiny reminder that life still had softness in it, even after everything. For a moment I just watched him, his eyelashes fluttering, his hair messy, his face peaceful. He looked like the only untouched part of my world. I kissed his forehead gently before slipping out of bed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. But for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt like a blank page, a place where life hadn't written anything yet. I walked into the small living room and sat by the window. The early morning light had a faint golden color, like it was offering a new beginning whether I felt ready or not. As the sun rose, my phone, lying on the table, buzzed again. One call, then another, then a message. Him, I didn't pick up, not out of anger, not out of fear. But because I finally understood something simple, I didn't need his voice to decide my life anymore. My quiet was mine. My distance was mine. My choices were mine. A soft knock sounded at the door. My heart jumped, but when I opened it, I saw a familiar face: my neighbor from the old neighborhood, the only person who ever checked on me when things weren't right. She stood there holding a small bag of groceries. "I heard you were here," she said softly. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." I felt my chest tighten, but not painfully. Her kindness felt like something warm on a cold day. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. She handed me the bag. "Then keep going," she said with a small smile. I swallowed hard, touched in a way I couldn't explain. "I will," I whispered. After she left, I placed the groceries on the counter. Apples, bread, tea. Simple things, but they felt like comfort. I made tea quietly, letting the steam rise into the calm morning air. My son woke up soon after, padding into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. "Mom," he mumbled, leaning into me. I wrapped my arms around him and kissed the top of his head. "I'm right here," I whispered. He smiled against my chest. "I had a good dream." I smiled softly. So did I, in a way. Not a dream with pictures or stories, but a dream that felt like possibility. I took my son for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, birds were chirping. Everything looked normal. Painfully normal. People passed by us without knowing anything about the storm I had survived. They didn't see a woman whose life had been pulled apart. They just saw a mother holding her child's hand. And strangely, that felt comforting. Maybe I didn't need the world to know my story. Maybe I didn't need anyone to understand the pain I carried. Maybe healing didn't start with being seen, maybe it started with seeing myself again. We stopped by a small park. My son ran to the swings, laughing as he pumped his legs back and forth. I sat on a bench, watching him, feeling the sun warm my skin. A thought came to me, gentle, quiet, steady. I can build a life again. Not a perfect life. Not the life I dreamed of when I first got married. But a life where peace wasn't something I borrowed, it was something I owned. A life where my son didn't grow up watching his mother shrink herself. A life where I didn't wait for someone to love me properly. A life where I didn't fear the next storm. A life where calm mornings like this weren't rare. A soft breeze brushed my face and I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, my son was waving. "Mom, look, I'm going higher," I laughed under my breath. "You are," I said, "you really are." And maybe I was too. Maybe I was starting to rise, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, gently, steadily. The way healing really happens. After dinner, after my son fell asleep again, after the house grew quiet, I stood in the doorway of the small, borrowed bedroom and just watched him. Children sleep like they trust the world completely, and I wanted to be the kind of mother who made that trust safe. I sat beside him and smoothed the blanket over his tiny shoulders. Then I whispered words I should have whispered to myself long ago. I deserve peace, too. My phone lay face down on the table behind me. More messages waited. More missed calls. More attempts from a man who only reached for me when he realized he had finally lost me. But I didn't touch it. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not until I was ready, if I ever chose to be. I wasn't running anymore, but I also wasn't returning. I was simply choosing myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like the most honest ending of all. Not dramatic, not loud, not explosive. Just a quiet closing of a door that was never meant for me. And the gentle opening of another, a door leading to a life I would build, slowly, patiently, one breath at a time. As I lay next to my son and closed my eyes, I held one final thought close to my heart. This is not where my story ends. This is where I begin. Thanks for listening. If you like this story, please like, share, and please subscribe my channel for support me. See you in the next video.